Hey everyone, this is Mr. Brass, and this is going to be my last video for Janson Gunn. Once again, I would like to say thank you to Janson for helping me out. I really needed it, and I'm fulfilling my end of I'm fulfilling my ends. As everyone knows, I don't like to take money from people. I prefer to work from my money. I don't like handouts. But anyway, to get this last video, Janson wanted me to do a video on atheist hypocrisy and, on a matter of atheists will say that it's not right that God makes compromises in a system, and they and about how atheists moralize God and what God does when dealing with people and the systems that they create. Now, Janson's point that he wanted me to point out is that there are plenty of times that atheists themselves compromise with the immorality of a system, but yet they're pointing out that they're bashing God for doing the exact same thing. For example, atheists will often say how wrong slavery is and how wrong, this exploitation is, all the while they own shoes that are made in sweatshops by people that are practically slaves. They make their videos very often on their computers that were also made by slaves in foreign countries. And basically every item of luxury that they have can be traced back partly to the suffering of other people. Now, if you get an atheist on this, they'll say, well, I didn't know about that, and I am trying to make a deal, and I'm trying to compromise, and, blah, 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 blah. And Janson's point would be that why, is it acceptable for atheists to compromise with a bad system, but not God? Now, some would say, well, God's all-powerful. He can change things. I'm saying, well, Janson would say, well, people have free will, and God works with them through their evilness and tries to bring out the good in the evilness, so he has to work with them. So God makes compromises. Slavery, Janson would argue, was one said compromise. It's not that God was saying it was right that they had slaves, and as I've always said myself, that I don't believe the Bible prohibits, I don't believe it condemns or condones slavery. It just merely states it as a fact of reality, that it happens. It doesn't really comment on the morality of it. It just sort of just states that it's there. Now, a Christian can be mad at me for that, an atheist can be mad at me and say, why didn't God be more clear and condemn it? I'm saying, I'm just saying that's how it is. The Bible doesn't say anything one way or the other about it. Now, one can say that, freedom is looked upon as better, obviously. But I also like to point out that freedom was a really relative thing in the ancient Near East. I pointed this out before. Really, there was a hierarchy, and the most that you could ever be in a society is the king. And the king would only be the slave to the gods. That was sort of the best position you could be. So even the kings were not completely free. True freedom was a divine attribute that only the gods could have, but not humans. Humans had to fall into a hierarchy of slavery and subservitude in many other ways. And a good thing about this system that I don't think I pointed out is that does sort of remove some of the stigma around slavery, because in that system, slavery would not in of itself be a bad position to be in. It wasn't in of itself often a shameful position. Now, it could be, depending on who you were a slave to and your rankings in society. In Muhammad's time, he had adopted someone, I believe his name was Zayn, and the stigma that he had with being a slave stuck around, and I'm not going to deny that did happen in the ancient Near East, but the good thing about the fact that slavery was just sort of seen as it just happened, and it was more of a hierarchical thing, meant that slavery in of itself did not have to be a shameful thing like it was in American slavery. But anyway, I'm going off topic, but there is a hypocrisy that Janson notes, that God is not allowed to compromise with people, but yet atheists are allowed to compromise with the societies that they have to deal with. And, obviously from my perspective, I obviously compromise a lot. But the thing is I'm not claiming to be moral, and I'm not moralizing the situation. I'm just stating it how it is. We're evil, hairless monkeys on this spinning rock, and we just simply do what we have to do to survive or to flourish, and we don't really consider any of the negatives about what we do in the long term. And, is that messed up? Yeah, but that's just sort of how it is. I hope one day to be able to make a book on deism and give a deist ethics. I would say it would be my own interpretation, of course. I'm more stoic, although I wouldn't call myself a stoic entirely. I have to do more research. I consider myself more of a virtue ethicist at the point. But, I'm very open to ethics. And I still need to learn more epistemology. That is something I completely suck ass at. And I think this big thing comes down to the fact that humans tend to be very hypocritical, and we don't really want to recognize that. And I don't think this is unique to atheists, although it certainly is. The difference between atheist hypocrisy and Christian hypocrisy is that when an atheist is a hypocrite, there's not really much of a standard, that something you can hold them to account to, because there's nothing inherently in atheism that they can be viewed as bad from that standpoint. Whereas from Christianity, their hypocrisy is stronger because they're supposed to be living up to Jesus. So there's something more that they can be held to account to. So that's personally why I think Christians can be more moral than atheists at times, because they don't just have a responsibility to society like atheists have, but they also have a double responsibility to God and Jesus, which sort of adds double loyalty, and it adds another moral dimension. Now, of course, this is not to say necessarily that all atheists are more immoral than Christians. For God heavens, I know good atheists that are much better than some of the Christians I know. Like a friend like Jackson Wheat's way more moral than Matt Powell, even though Jackson Wheat's an atheist and Matt Powell's a Christian. So, this is not to be, and of course I would always say Shannon Q is more moral than me. And I still mean that. She very much is in many ways. But I really think that what Christianity allows, it does allow for double accountability, which is something that atheism can't by itself promise. And, I think that's just an interesting fact that to know when it comes to atheist hypocrisy, when it comes to society, the Old Testament, slavery, and the like. Well, coming on 10 minutes. I would just like to say, once again, thank you, Janson, for supporting me. I hope to have your support in the future. Well, that is all for today. This is Mr. Brass saying goodbye and get wise.